It was a quiet, rainy morning when a woman heard a faint squeak beneath a pile of damp leaves. She gently pushed them aside and froze. There, shivering and fragile, lay the tiniest puppy she had ever seen, smaller than her palm, ribs visible, barely breathing. Its eyes opened just enough to meet hers, filled with pleading and fear, without hesitation. She scooped the puppy into her trembling hands and ran toward the nearest veterinary clinic. Dr. Harris rushed over, stunned at the sight. The puppy's heartbeat was so faint, it was almost gone. As the vet examined the fragile creature, he realized something so shocking that his eyes welled up with tears. This tiny puppy wasn't just small, it was a miracle. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The morning was cold and gray when a woman named Sarah walked down the quiet park trail, her boots crunching on damp leaves. Just as she passed an old oak, she froze. A faint squeaking sound came from beneath a pile of twigs and leaves. At first, she thought it was a bird. But when she bent down and carefully brushed the debris aside, her heart stopped. There, trembling and barely breathing, was the smallest puppy she had ever seen, no bigger than her thumb. Its eyes were barely open, its fur thin as silk, and its tiny chest rose and fell with fragile effort. Sarah cupped it gently in her hands, whispering, "Hang on, little one." Without another thought, she wrapped the shivering creature in her scarf and ran toward the nearest veterinary clinic, praying she wasn't too late. When Sarah burst through the clinic doors, the vet, Dr. Harris, looked up in confusion. "Please help him," she gasped, holding out the bundle wrapped in her scarf. He carefully peeled it back, and his jaw fell open. Nestled inside was the tiniest puppy he'd ever seen, no heavier than a few paper clips. Its weak whimpers barely reached his ears. Dr. Harris immediately motioned to his assistant. "Get the heat lamp, now," he ordered. They placed the puppy on a soft towel beneath the light. For a tense few seconds, no one breathed. The little creature's heartbeat was faint and erratic, its breathing uneven, every inhale a battle. The vet leaned closer, whispering softly, "Come on, little one. Stay with me." He could feel the warmth slowly returning to its body. His assistant stared in disbelief. "Is this even possible? It's so small." Dr. Harris shook his head. "I've seen premature pups, but nothing like this." He carefully examined the puppy's lungs, pulse, and bones, all underdeveloped, yet astonishingly strong. The puppy let out a faint squeak and tried to lift its head. That moment, Dr. Harris felt something stir inside him, a mix of awe, confusion, and protectiveness. He didn't know it yet. But this tiny creature was about to change everything he believed in. For the next several hours, Dr. Harris and his assistant worked tirelessly to stabilize the fragile puppy. They fed him drop by drop using a syringe, monitored his temperature, and kept him wrapped in soft cotton. Slowly, the tiny creature began to show signs of strength, a twitch of his paw, a faint squeal, a heartbeat that no longer wavered. But something about him puzzled the vet. His bone density, heart rhythm, and body size didn't match any breed pattern he knew. Finally, Dr. Harris decided to run a DNA test, mostly to satisfy his growing curiosity. When the results came in, he stared at the screen in stunned silence. The puppy's genetic structure wasn't just rare, it was completely unique. A mutation so extraordinary that no recorded case in veterinary history matched it. This puppy wasn't premature. It was born with a 1 in a billion genetic anomaly causing extreme dwarfism. What shocked him even more was that the mutation should have made survival impossible. Yet here this tiny creature was, breathing, moving, fighting to live. Dr. Harris slumped into his chair, whispering to himself, "You shouldn't even be alive. And yet, you're here." He looked down at the puppy, who blinked up at him weakly, as if saying, "I'm not done fighting yet." And in that instant, the vet's mission became clear. He would do anything to keep this miracle alive. Days turned into nights inside the small veterinary clinic. Dr. Harris barely left the puppy's side. He named him Tiny Tim, after the little boy in A Christmas Carol who refused to give up hope. Each hour was a battle, feeding him a single drop of milk at a time, massaging his fragile body to keep his blood flowing, and whispering soft words of encouragement. At first, the vet believed science alone could save him. But soon, it became something deeper. When he held Tiny Tim against his chest, feeling the faint rhythm of that impossible heartbeat, he realized this was more than medicine. It was a fight for faith itself. There were nights when Dr. Harris almost gave up. Tiny Tim's breathing would stop for terrifying seconds, his body going limp. Each time, the vet's hands would shake as he tried to revive him. "Don't leave me, buddy," he whispered, tears mixing with exhaustion. Every case he'd handled before now felt insignificant. This wasn't just another patient. This was a symbol of life refusing to quit. Even the clinic staff noticed the change. The once stoic vet now smiled at the smallest sign of progress. A tail twitch, a soft squeak. Tiny Tim had become his reason to believe again. And he wasn't letting go. One morning, after another long, sleepless night, Dr. Harris slumped in his chair beside the incubator. Tiny Tim had been weaker than usual, barely responding, his breathing shallow. The vet's heart sank. He'd done everything he could, but it seemed nature had finally caught up. The clinic was silent except for the soft hum of machines. Then, a faint sound broke through, a tiny whimper. Dr. Harris lifted his head, eyes wide. Inside the incubator, Tiny Tim was moving, not twitching, but standing. His tiny legs wobbled as he pushed himself upright, his head bobbing unsteadily. "Tim?" the vet whispered, standing in disbelief. The little pup took a shaky step forward, then another, letting out the smallest bark he'd ever heard. Tears flooded Dr. Harris's eyes. He opened the incubator, and Tiny Tim stumbled into his hand, pressing his nose weakly against the vet's fingers. "You did it," he choked out. "You actually did it." The assistant ran in, gasping. "He's walking." Dr. Harris laughed through tears. "He's living." From that moment, the clinic transformed. Every person who entered stopped to see the miracle puppy, the creature that defied every law of biology. Tiny Tim wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving. Proof that sometimes miracles come in the smallest, most fragile forms imaginable. Weeks later, Tiny Tim had become a global sensation. Dr. Harris, urged by his assistant, began sharing short video clips of the puppy's journey online, the feedings, the sleepless nights, the first wobbly steps. Within days, the story spread like wildfire. News outlets picked it up, calling him the miracle puppy. Messages flooded in from around the world, people saying Tiny Tim gave them hope when they'd lost their own. But behind the fame, Dr. Harris stayed humble. He still started each morning the same way, a quiet cup of coffee and a check on his tiny patient. Tiny Tim now weighed almost a pound, small but full of energy. He'd bark proudly each time the vet entered the room, his little tail wagging with joy. One afternoon, Dr. Harris lifted Tiny Tim into his palm and smiled. "You reminded me what medicine really means," he whispered. "It's not just about saving lives. It's about believing in them." The clinic staff stood nearby, tears glistening as the vet continued. "You made me remember why I became a healer." That evening, Dr. Harris filmed one last update. In it, Tiny Tim stood tall, barking at the camera. He was supposed to die, the vet said, voice trembling. But instead, he taught us all how to live. The video ended with Tiny Tim curling up in the vet's hand, eyes closing peacefully, and millions watching around the world cried, not out of sadness, but out of pure, restored faith in miracles.